Hey everyone. Tonight we begin in a city already dead. But that doesn't yet know it. Berlin, April 1945. Its streets are rivers of rubble, its people ghosts in threadbare coats, and the sky never stops falling in pieces. The Red Army has arrived, not with mercy, but with a hunger sharpened by 4 long years of war. Officially, they are here to liberate. In reality, they will burn, take, and break whatever is left. Men will be shot for lowering a white flag. Boys with rifles too big for their arms will be sent to hunt tanks. And the women mothers, daughters, even grandmothers will face something worse than death, night after night. This is not the story told in parades or history books. This is the last breath of the Reich, where the word victory meant nothing, and survival was simply living one more hour. So, before you get comfortable, like and subscribe, and tell me what time is it where you are now. Dim the lights and step with me into the ruins, where every shadow hides a choice between horror and despair. You stand amidst the wreckage, a chill April wind rustling through the shattered remains of what were once grand buildings. The air is thick with the scent of dust, damp earth, and something metallic, the faint, acrid smell of recent explosions. It is April 21st, 1945, a day marked not by a dawn, but by an invasion. You feel the tremor in the ground before you hear the rumble. A deep, persistent thrumming that seems to shake the very foundations of the ruined city. These are the first Soviet troops, not merely entering, but storming Berlin, an overwhelming tide that has broken through the last desperate defensive lines of a collapsing empire. For months, the news had been of retreat, a slow, agonizing slide backward across the continent. But somehow, in the heart of the Third Reich, a defiant, if delusional, hope had persisted. That hope now shatters with every approaching tank tread. You recall the whispers, the frantic, often contradictory reports from the front. The Soviet advance, once distant, became a rushing torrent, devouring the landscape between the outskirts and the capital. And with them, a relentless chorus of mortar fire, a percussive symphony of destruction that has been Berlin's soundtrack for weeks. It pulses, sometimes near, sometimes far, a constant reminder that the sky is falling, piece by piece. You feel the city itself drawing breath, a ragged, uneven gasp for air, as if it knows its time is short. Reports from deep within the Fuhrer bunker, if you could hear them, would speak of a leader in denial, issuing orders for phantom counterattacks, demanding that non-existent divisions push back an unstoppable force. But you, out here on the streets, see only the grim reality. The German forces are exhausted, skeletal, depleted not just of men, but of spirit, of ammunition, of hope. Yet, they fight, fueled by a mixture of terror and fanaticism. For Himmler's squads patrol the rear, executing deserters on sight. The choice is often not between life and death, but between one kind of terrible death and another. By April 25th, just days after the first breach, the Iron Ring is complete. Berlin is encircled, a dying beast trapped in a cage of its own making. You feel the tightness, the suffocating embrace of the siege. Over 1 million Soviet soldiers, a vast, undulating sea of humanity. Backed by nearly 10,000 tanks, each one a rolling fortress of steel and fire, have dwarfed the city's defenders. You couldn't truly imagine such a number. It's an abstract, overwhelming figure. but you feel its weight in the air, in the endless sound of distant shelling, in the way the light seems to diminish under the sheer force of their presence. You are caught, a tiny speck in the eye of a storm, and the storm is closing in. The world outside has ceased to exist, leaving only the immediate, terrifying reality of the approaching front lines. Every window is a threat, every doorway a potential ambush, and the very ground beneath your feet vibrates with the impending doom. The desperate defense of this dying Reich, you observe, falls not to the mighty armies of propaganda, but to the remnants, the forgotten, the unexpected. You see them, scattered throughout the rubble-strewn streets, a few grizzled veterans, their faces etched with the fatigue of years of war, their uniforms hanging loosely on their frames. These are the last of the Wehrmacht, the regular army, now reduced to shadows of their former selves. Alongside them are the fanatic Waffen-SS, their eyes burning with an ideological fire that even the bitter winds of defeat cannot extinguish. They march with a chilling resolve, ready to fight to the last breath, embodying the grim orders that echo through the ruins, fight to the death. You hear the stories, whispered fearfully from person to person, of Himmler's squads, the shadowy figures patrolling the rear, rifles at the ready, executing any who dare to falter, any who even think of lowering a white flag. But then, you see the others, the most heartbreaking of all the Hitler youth. Boys barely past childhood, their faces still round, clutching rifles that seem too large for their trembling hands. They stand alongside older men, their expressions a mixture of fear and forced bravado. Luftwaffe ground crews, mechanics and clerks, men who once serviced aircraft, now find themselves armed and thrust onto the front lines, their technical skills replaced by a desperate, amateurish courage. The city itself has become a battleground, every building a potential fortress, every pile of bricks a barricade. You witness the street-to-street combat, a brutal, intimate dance of death. From shattered windows, they fire. From crumbling doorways, they ambush. The sound of rifle fire is constant, punctuated by the sharper crack of machine guns and the earth-shaking roar of artillery. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the gnawing hunger in your stomach and the parched feeling in your throat, you sometimes see it a flash of defiant resistance. A small German unit, cornered and outgunned, manages to repel a Soviet assault, if only for a few precious hours. They fight with a desperate ingenuity, using the very rubble to their advantage, creating traps and ambushes from the ruins of their homes. These small victories, however fleeting, offer a flicker of what once was, a ghost of the fighting spirit that once conquered a continent. But you know, deep down, they are futile. They are merely delaying the inevitable, slowing the unstoppable tide by moments, not days. Meanwhile, the suffering of the civilians is a silent scream that permeates every corner of the city. You see them, gaunt figures, their clothes grimy with dust and soot, their eyes wide with a permanent terror. Food is a memory, water a precious, rationed commodity. Each passing day, the city shrinks, not physically, but in its ability to sustain life. Your own stomach growls, a hollow ache that gnaws at your resolve. You share the quiet desperation of a city teetering on the brink, where every morsel of food is a blessing, every drop of water a miracle. The constant shelling, the lack of clean water, the cold nights in cellars, all of it chips away at the human spirit, leaving behind a profound weariness, a longing for an end, any end, to this unbearable agony. The air itself feels heavy with the unspoken prayers and unspoken fears of millions. Deep beneath the shattered surface of Berlin, far removed from the dust and the gunfire, you imagine another world, one of strange, distorted reality. In the concrete labyrinth of the Fuhrer bunker, you picture a man, once the absolute master of millions, now reduced to a ghost, sustained by a fragile thread of delusion. His once piercing eyes, you hear, are now clouded, his body trembling, a caricature of the orator who once commanded such fervent loyalty. Around him, the air is thick with the smell of stale cigarettes, damp concrete, and the lingering scent of despair. This is where the last acts of the Reich's leadership play out, a tragic, farcical drama witnessed by only a few terrified souls. You can almost hear the voice of Goebbels, the Reich's master of propaganda, echoing through the bunker's low ceilings. His words, once crafted to stir the masses to triumph, now serve a solitary purpose to reinforce the crumbling delusion of his leader. He speaks of phantom armies, of decisive counterattacks that exist only in the fevered imaginations of the bunker's inhabitants. The outside world, the real world of collapsing front lines and overwhelming Soviet power, is banished, replaced by a self-sustaining narrative of imminent victory. You might wonder, if you were there, if they truly believed it, or if the propaganda had become a shield, protecting them from the unbearable truth. As the days bleed into one another, marked only by the shifting shadows of fluorescent lights, the cracks in the facade begin to show. You imagine the desperate attempts of Goering and Himmler, once powerful figures in their own right, to seize control, to negotiate a surrender that would preserve some fragment of their power, some sliver of their lives. Their efforts, are futile. The time for negotiation has long passed, swallowed by the insatiable maw of war. Then comes the final, bizarre act. On April 29th and 30th, as the Soviet artillery pounds the ground above, you hear of a macabre wedding in the depths of the bunker. Hitler marrying Eva Braun, a desperate attempt to grasp at some semblance of normalcy, some personal connection in the face of absolute annihilation. It is a moment of chilling intimacy amidst the cataclysm. Immediately afterward, he dictates his will, a final, rambling testament to his twisted ideology, appointing new, doomed successors. And then, silence. A gunshot. Muffled by the bunker's thick walls, he commits suicide. His last act a desperate escape from the reckoning. His body, along with Eva Braun's, is hurried outside, doused in gasoline, and set ablaze. A desperate attempt to prevent their capture, to deny the Soviets the ultimate trophy. The smell of burning flesh, however faint, must have permeated the bunker, a final, horrifying incense to the end of an era. The scene repeats itself. Just days later, Goebbels, the architect of so much deceit, along with his wife Magda, poisons their 6 innocent children, one by one, a monstrous act of fanaticism, before taking their own lives. You contemplate the chilling logic of such a choice. A perverse dedication to an ideology that would rather see its children dead than live in a world without it. These are the final, desperate gasps of a regime consumed by its own destructive power, leaving behind only the echoing silence of its ultimate demise. As you navigate the desolate streets, Your eyes are drawn to figures that strike a different chord of horror and pity children. This is the children's war, where innocence is a luxury no one can afford. You see boys, some no older than 14, their frames too small for the oversized uniforms they wear, their faces smudged with dirt and fear. These are the designated werewolves, part of a desperate Nazi plan for guerrilla operations. A futile attempt to continue the fight behind Soviet lines with sabotage and assassinations. You hear whispers of explosives disguised in clothing, of children trained to deliver death. Yet, you also sense the profound amateurishness, the lack of proper training, the rushed preparation that makes these efforts not brave, but simply heartbreaking. They are lambs to the slaughter, propelled forward by a desperate, dying regime. Then you witness them, the bicycle anti-tank units. You see them, sometimes in groups of 2 or 3, pedaling furiously through the rubble. A single Panzerfaust, a disposable anti-tank weapon, slung across their shoulders or clutched in their small hands. These are not soldiers. They are sacrifices. You know, instinctively, that these are suicide missions. To engage a Soviet tank with a Panzerfaust requires immense courage, precision, and an almost suicidal proximity. For boys like these, it means cycling directly into the path of overwhelming steel, firing a single, desperate shot, and then being consumed by the blast or crushed beneath the treads. The very idea of it twists something inside you. You recall the quiet, courageous voice of Albert Speer, one of the few who dared to speak out against this madness. He warned against fighting in the city, against the futility, and specifically, against the use of child soldiers. His words, of course, were drowned out by the screams of fanatics and the roar of artillery. But his warning hangs in the air around you, a mournful echo. Accusations of infanticide began to circulate, quiet at first, then growing louder in the stunned aftermath, as the sheer number of dead children, armed and thrown into battle, becomes undeniable. It feels like a crime against humanity, a final, unforgivable sin of a regime that devoured its own young. You might see them. Some of these boys, SS Panzer Grenadier Youth Divisions, supposedly elite units, yet filled with soldiers aged 16 to 18, and sometimes, sickeningly, even younger. Their equipment is ill-fitting, their rifles unwieldy, almost comically large in their small hands. You watch as they fumble with their weapons, their movements awkward, betraying their lack of proper training. In their first engagements, they become easy targets. The sharp crack of Soviet sniper fire is often followed by the quiet collapse of a young boy, barely a man, his life extinguished before it had truly begun. Even the girls, the Blitz medal as they were sometimes called, are not spared. You see them, stationed alongside the boys, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. They are given ideological speeches, told stories of ancient Sparta, of heroic sacrifice. But the words are hollow against the backdrop of crumbling buildings and the cries of the wounded. Most of these Hitler youth fighters are killed, their youthful idealism and terror consumed by the ravenous maw of war. Those who survive, you know, will carry the invisible wounds of this brutal, premature plunge into hell, traumatized for a lifetime. Their sacrifice, you realize, was not for victory, but for nothing but a cruel, bitter end. Amidst the dust and despair, you observe the women of Berlin, the silent pillars upon which this crumbling city rests. Their roles, once rigidly defined by Nazi ideology, mothers, homemakers, guardians of the hearth, have been violently reconfigured. The propaganda, once so clear about women's place, now shifts, desperately urging them to fight, to pick up weapons from the fallen, to defend the very ruins of their homes. You see some of them, female auxiliaries attached to SS units, their uniforms ill-fitting, their movements uncertain. Most are untrained for combat, their bravery stemming not from military discipline, but from a fierce, primal instinct to protect what little remains. They are nurses, typists, communication specialists, now forced to shoulder a rifle, their hands, once soft, now calloused and stained with grime. But the vast majority are still the mothers, the wives, the caretakers. You see them, their faces etched with a weariness that goes beyond physical exhaustion. They are the ones who try to maintain some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. To find a scrap of food, a drop of clean water, to soothe a crying child, all under the constant, nerve-shredding symphony of shelling. You hear the deep, concussive thud of explosions, feeling it reverberate through the ground, even as you watch a line of women, old and young, waiting patiently for a meager ration of water from a broken pipe. Their faces impassive, their determination absolute. Their courage is quiet, an enduring resilience in the face of relentless bombardment. Their efforts to defend their homes, their neighborhoods, are often heroic but hopelessly outmatched. You might witness a woman, armed with a rusty hunting rifle or even a kitchen knife, standing guard over her apartment block, her eyes narrowed with a fierce, protective fire. You see them barricading doorways, tending to the wounded with scraps of cloth, digging through rubble with bare hands, hoping to find a loved one buried beneath the debris. These are not acts of grand strategy, but of desperate, individual survival, fueled by an instinct to hold on to the last vestiges of their lives, their dignity. The sensory details of their daily struggle become part of your own experience, the constant dust that coats everything, clinging to hair and clothes, filling the air with a gritty texture, the pervasive smell of smoke and damp concrete, mingled with the faint, sweet decay of bodies hidden beneath the rubble. The sound of distant cries, sometimes of pain, sometimes of despair, carried on the wind. You see their hands, rough and chapped, endlessly washing clothes in muddy water, or tending to the small, pathetic fires they manage to build for warmth and cooking. Their lives are stripped down to the most basic elements: survival, protection, and the silent, unspoken hope for an end to the nightmare. Their strength, you realize, is not in their ability to fight like soldiers, but in their unwavering capacity to endure. They are the backbone of a dying city, absorbing the blows, tending to the wounds, and attempting to piece together fragments of life from the shards of a shattered world. Their suffering is profound, often unseen, a testament to the quiet heroism of those who simply refuse to break, even when everything around them crumbles into dust. They embody a different kind of bravery, a daily, relentless struggle to keep life, however fragile, flickering in the heart of destruction. Then, a different kind of fear descends, heavier and colder than the sound of bombs. You feel it in the air, a palpable dread that settles upon the women and girls of the city like a shroud. The whispers, which began as distant rumors, now materialize into a horrifying reality. Propaganda, you recall, had warned of Russian brutality, painting a grim picture of vengeful soldiers. But the reality, you soon discover, far exceeds even the darkest imaginings. It is a dark tide, a systematic shadow that falls over the so-called liberation. You witness the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, the way women instinctively draw closer together, the guarded glances they exchange when Soviet soldiers pass. It's an unspoken language of fear. You see their faces, once animated by hope for an end to the fighting, now etched with a deeper, more primal terror. The initial relief at the cessation of direct combat is quickly replaced by a profound sense of vulnerability. This is not the clean violence of bullets and bombs, but a violation of the body and spirit, a deliberate shattering of dignity. You hear the echoes of notorious cases, hushed but persistent, stories that spread like wildfire through the traumatized population. A 14-year-old girl, you are told, shot for resisting, her young life extinguished in an act of brutal assertion. A woman, gang-raped in front of her family, driven to desperate suicide attempts, her spirit broken beyond repair. These individual stories, though terrible, are merely reflections of a widespread, pervasive pattern. It is not an isolated incident. It is a normalized horror. You might observe women performing a grim, desperate act of protection, stripping wounded German soldiers of their uniforms, if they can, hoping to disguise them as civilians, to protect them from Soviet execution squads. This is a subtle yet profound illustration of the fear that permeates every interaction, a constant negotiation for survival, not just for themselves, but for their men too. The vulnerability is total, the power imbalance absolute. You watch as the horrific reality of sexual violence becomes, for many, a sickening routine, woven into the fabric of daily life. There is little to no intervention from authorities. The victorious army, it seems, has granted itself a terrible license. You feel the deep sense of helplessness that settles over the population, a profound realization that their pleas for mercy will go unheard. The liberation has brought with it a different kind of hell, one that targets the most vulnerable, leaving an indelible stain on the very concept of victory. The air itself feels thick with unspoken suffering, a quiet epidemic of pain that will linger long after the guns fall silent. The dark tide flows deeper, its currents dragging victims into an abyss of dehumanization. You observe, with a sickening sense of helplessness, how the acts, once shocking, become disturbingly public, tragically normalized. There are instances where you might see public assaults, stark and brutal, often with lines of soldiers waiting their turn. It is a spectacle of power and degradation, designed to break the spirit, to strip away all dignity. The sheer brazenness of it speaks to a deep-seated conviction that these acts are justified, a terrible revenge for Nazi crimes, a warped sense of retribution for 4 years of war and suffering inflicted upon the Soviet Union. This justification, however, does not erase the horror. You hear the faint, horrifying whispers of what happens after. Victims, already traumatized, sometimes mutilated after the assault, or even killed immediately following. Their lives discarded with a chilling indifference. The violence knows no bounds, no age limits. Elderly women, their bodies frail and their lives already long, are targeted alongside young girls, barely on the cusp of womanhood. It is an indiscriminate wave of terror that washes over the entire female population, leaving no one untouched by the pervasive fear. The widespread acceptance, or at least the tacit justification, of this violence as revenge is a bitter pill to swallow. You hear the justifications, the pronouncements that the fascist pigs deserve it, that Berlin is paying the price for the atrocities committed by the German army, while the suffering inflicted by the Nazis was immense and undeniable. This retribution creates a new, equally profound wound, a cycle of brutality that seems to have no end. You feel the weight of this collective trauma, the sense that an entire population is being punished, not just the architects of the war, the physical and emotional scars carried by the survivors, you know, will last for life. You see it in their eyes, a hollow, distant look that speaks of unspeakable horrors. Their bodies, though perhaps healed of immediate wounds, bear invisible marks that will never fade. Their minds become a labyrinth of suppressed memories, of fractured trust, of a world irrevocably altered. They are forced to live with the ghosts of what happened, night after night, long after the war itself is declared over. You ponder the profound impact of such pervasive violence. It erodes trust, shatters community bonds, and leaves a deep, festering wound in the soul of a city. The very air around you feels heavy with this silent suffering, a pervasive undercurrent of pain beneath the dust and rubble. Even as the fighting slowly subsides, the battle for dignity and healing for these women has only just begun. Their resilience, born from unimaginable pain, becomes a quiet testament to the enduring human spirit, even when faced with the absolute worst of humanity. Their stories, often untold, are etched into the very fabric of Berlin's post-war identity, a quiet, mournful echo in the ruins. As the thunder of battle rages above, you seek refuge in the subterranean world of Berlin's bunkers and subway tunnels. The air here is thick, heavy with the breath of thousands, mingled with the faint, metallic scent of damp concrete and the sharp tang of human waste. The Anhalter Bahnhof bunker, a massive concrete fortress, becomes a microcosm of the city's final agony. You find yourself crammed into a space designed for perhaps a third of its occupants. 12,000 people squeezed into what feels like a suffocatingly small area, roughly 38,750 square feet. Every inch is claimed, every breath shared. You feel the press of bodies, the restless shifting, the quiet murmurs, punctuated by the cries of children and the groans of the wounded. The conditions are horrific. Sanitation is a forgotten concept. The stench, once tolerable, becomes a constant companion, a heavy blanket that never lifts. Water, you realize, is more valuable than food. A single cup of clean water is a treasure, traded like gold. You thirst constantly, your throat parched, your lips cracked. The scarcity pushes people to desperate measures. You witness the risky water runs. Brave souls venturing out from the relative safety of the bunker, under the constant threat of Soviet fire, to find a functioning pump or a broken pipe. Many do not return, their lives claimed by a sniper's bullet or a falling shell, all for a precious few gallons of water. You learn of the grim truth, even the Red Cross flags, stark white against the gray rubble, are ignored. Soviet artillery continues to pound the areas around the bunkers, showing no mercy, no recognition of neutrality. The sound of explosions above ground is magnified down here, vibrating through the concrete, shaking your very bones. Each blast sends a ripple of fear through the crowded space, a collective intake of breath, a shared dread that the next shell might pierce the thick roof above. The air becomes thin, difficult to breathe, filled with the stifling anxiety of being trapped, utterly helpless. As the Soviet troops close in, you see another desperate migration, not above ground, but below. Civilians, seeking any escape from the murderous street fighting, begin fleeing through the labyrinthine subway tunnels. These dark, damp passages, once bustling arteries of city life, become conduits of escape, a desperate crawl through the earth's belly. You imagine the eerie silence broken only by shuffling feet, hushed whispers, and the distant echo of gunfire. The tunnels offer a fleeting illusion of safety, a temporary reprieve from the relentless destruction above. You exist in a state of suspended animation, a breath held in the darkness, hoping for an unseen dawn. The claustrophobia is immense, the lack of fresh air debilitating. The constant tension, the fear of discovery, the gnawing hunger and thirst all contribute to a profound sense of exhaustion, a weariness that seeps into your very bones. Yet, you also witness acts of quiet kindness, of shared crumbs, of comforting hands, proving that even in the darkest depths, the human spirit flickers, clinging to the smallest sparks of empathy amidst the encroaching shadows. This underground world, a temporary sanctuary, becomes a testament to both the horrors of the war and the enduring will to survive. And then, you sense a shift, a subtle change in the air, a crack in the relentless storm. It is a moment, both symbolic and profoundly real, that marks the end of an era. On May 2nd, you hear it, a roar, not of battle, but of triumph. The red flag is raised over the Reichstag, the monumental building that had once been the very heart of German legislative power, now a scarred and hollowed shell. You envision the scene: Soviet soldiers, exhausted but jubilant, planting their banner high above the ruins, a stark, undeniable declaration of victory. It is the end of the Third Reich's physical existence, a final, definitive period at the end of a bloody, brutal sentence. For many, you feel, this moment brings a strange mix of emotions. There is no joy, not truly. How could there be, amidst such devastation? But there is an undeniable, pervasive sense of relief. The relentless shelling, the constant fear of bombs, the brutal street-to-street fighting, it has ceased. The long, terrifying symphony of destruction finally quiets, replaced by an uneasy, unfamiliar silence, broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the calls of victorious soldiers. The city, which has been screaming for weeks, finally seems to breathe, a ragged, shuddering gasp. You might walk out into the open, cautiously, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of a sky that is no longer raining death. The sun, if it breaks through the smoke and dust, feels different, almost alien in its warmth. But the landscape remains. The streets are still rivers of rubble, the buildings still gaping wounds. The smell of dust and decay still lingers heavy in the air. The physical devastation is absolute, a monument to the war's ferocity. Every brick, every twisted piece of metal, every shattered window pane screams of destruction. The victory, you understand, belongs to one side, but the suffering belongs to all. The raising of the flag is a moment of profound symbolism, but it does not erase the pain, does not bring back the dead, does not heal the wounds. It is merely the end of one chapter, and the uncertain, terrifying beginning of another. You see the faces around you, still gaunt, still etched with fear and loss. But perhaps, just perhaps, with a flicker of something new, the fragile, terrifying dawn of survival. The air, though calmer, still feels heavy with unspoken stories, with the ghosts of those lost. The silence that follows the roar of the guns is not a peaceful silence, but a hollow one, filled with the echoes of screams and the whispers of despair. You stand amidst the ruins, a witness to history, feeling the weight of the millions of lives that have been swept away by this cataclysmic conflict. The flag flies high, a stark reminder of who conquered whom. But beneath it, the city and its people must now confront the daunting task of simply existing, of breathing, of finding a way forward in a world forever changed. The sound of distant shouts, once a harbinger of doom, now carries a different, still unsettling, meaning the conquerors have arrived, and their presence will define the future. The guns are silent now. The red flag flutters above the Reichstag, a grim trophy. You stand in a city that has been consumed and then slowly, painfully, begins to exhale. The final casualty toll is staggering. Figures whispered with a quiet horror. Roughly 80,000 Soviet soldiers lost their lives in this final, brutal assault. For the Germans, soldiers and civilians alike, the numbers are even more devastating, around 100,000 military personnel, and an estimated 125,000 civilians caught in the crossfire, starved, or simply broken by the sheer weight of the siege. Each number, you realize, represents a life, a family, a universe extinguished. These are not just statistics. They are ghosts that now walk the shattered streets. For the women of Berlin, the liberation marks not an end to suffering, but the beginning of a different, insidious kind of hell. You see them, their resilience tested anew each day. The ongoing assaults during the occupation become a silent epidemic, a continuous violation that rarely makes it into the official histories. Survival itself becomes a daily struggle, a nuanced dance between submission and defiance, between finding food and protecting oneself. You see the haunted eyes, the carefully constructed masks of composure, the quiet despair that lingers beneath the surface. The losses compound the loss of homes, now reduced to rubble, making millions refugees in their own city. The deaths of loved ones, not just in the final battle, but throughout the long years of war, fathers, brothers, sons, now gone forever. Malnutrition is rampant. The gaunt figures a testament to years of scarcity and the immediate disruption of food supplies. Disease, born from the unsanitary conditions, runs rampant through the crowded cellars and makeshift shelters. All of it, every single one of these ongoing struggles, compounds the trauma, pressing down on a population already at its breaking point. You realize that for many women, the war's official end is not a victory, but a transition into a protracted, personal conflict. The physical scars may begin to heal, but the invisible wounds, etched deep into their psyches, will remain. They are the silent survivors, the ones who bore the brunt of not just the fighting, but the immediate, brutal aftermath. Their stories, their immense resilience, and their profound suffering remain, tragically, an often overlooked chapter in the grand narrative of World War II history. As you stand amidst the lingering echoes of conflict, You hear the quiet sounds of a city trying to rebuild, brick by painstaking brick. But beneath the surface, the whispers of the past persist. You reflect on the incredible strength of the human spirit, its capacity to endure even the most unspeakable horrors. The air, though no longer filled with the roar of battle, still carries the faint scent of dust and memory. The city will rise again, you know, but it will forever carry the imprint of its final, agonizing breath, and the untold stories of those who survived it, day by quiet, agonizing day. And perhaps, somewhere in the quiet spaces between the rebuilt walls, their resilience will always whisper, a testament to what was lost and what, against all odds, endured. You are there. You feel the palpable shift in the air, a tremor of exhilaration running through the very cobblestones beneath your feet. It is the summer of 1944, and the Allied forces, after the monumental landings on D-Day, have been pushing steadily, relentlessly, across the French landscape. Each town, each village, freed from the long, suffocating grip of occupation, erupts in a spontaneous, overwhelming outpouring of joy. The air thrums with cheers, the peal of church bells long silenced, and the triumphant, if slightly off-key, singing of the Marseillaise. You see faces, once etched with fear and privation, now contorted in expressions of pure, unadulterated relief, tears streaming down cheeks as they wave small, hand-stitched French flags. The scent of celebratory wine, cheap tobacco, and a faint, lingering aroma of gunpowder hangs in the air, a strange mix of war and peace. Imagine the collective sigh, a deep, resonant exhalation from a nation that has held its breath for 4 long years. You watch as Allied soldiers, young men from distant lands like America and Britain, are swarmed by ecstatic crowds. Children, wide-eyed and laughing, offer them small bouquets of wildflowers. Women embrace them, tears soaking into their uniforms, offering what little food they have left, sharing the precious moments of this hard-won freedom. The streets, for so long patrolled by a heavy, foreign presence, are now overflowing with the vibrant, chaotic pulse of life reborn. But then, as the initial euphoria begins to settle, a different kind of energy, colder and sharper, begins to ripple through the jubilant throngs. You feel a subtle shift in the temperature of the crowd, the joyous murmurs giving way to a more guttural sound, a low hum of anticipation that is unsettling in its intensity. Your gaze, which moments ago savored the light of hope, now catches on something darker, something deeply disquieting. You see figures being moved, pushed, or, in some cases, brutally dragged toward the center of the town squares. These are not German soldiers, now largely vanished, nor are they known collaborators from the local resistance lists. No, these are women. Women you might have seen at the market, or walking down a quiet lane, or perhaps knew only by a fleeting glance. A new, chilling term begins to spread like wildfire through the whispers of the crowd: horizontal collaboration. It's a phrase meant to describe women accused of having intimate, often sexual, relations with German soldiers during the occupation. The very words are heavy with judgment, laced with contempt. You see the rapid transformation of the collective mood, the unbridled joy of freedom, a fragile thing, is swiftly twisted, perverted, into a wave of raw, brutal vengeance. It's a stark reminder of how quickly the euphoria of liberation can curdle into something ugly, How easily the collective desire for justice can morph into a thirst for retribution that spares no one. You watch, a knot tightening in your stomach, as the celebration turns into a carnival of cruelty. And the very people who were just moments ago celebrating their liberty now participate in a different kind of public spectacle. The cheers for the Allies haven't quite faded, but now they are joined by angry shouts directed at those deemed to have betrayed their nation's honor, their community spirit. It is a harsh, immediate, and utterly shocking price of joy. You stand amidst the lingering shadows of a town under occupation. Long before the shouts of liberation, the air, for years, has carried the scent of unspoken tension, of quiet defiance, and of an unsettling normalcy. German soldiers are not just an unseen enemy in distant bunkers. They are an omnipresent, undeniable part of daily life. You might see them at the local bakery, their uniforms a stark contrast to the civilian clothes, waiting patiently for their bread. You might pass them in the narrow streets, their conversations in a foreign tongue a constant, low murmur in the background of your existence. They reside in requisitioned homes, often living in close proximity to the very families they are occupying. This is not a war of distant front lines. It is a war lived in the tight confines of shared streets, shared markets, sometimes even shared houses. Within this strange, enforced intimacy, human connections, against all odds, sometimes formed. You ponder the myriad reasons why a French woman might find herself drawn to, or inextricably linked with, a German soldier. Was it love? A genuine, bewildering connection that blossomed in the most improbable of circumstances. Like a fragile flower pushing through concrete. You can imagine the quiet, stolen moments, the shared glances, the hushed conversations, the desperate human need for companionship and tenderness even in the darkest of times. The heart, you realize, is a complex, often illogical, thing, indifferent to the dictates of patriotism or the uniforms that define enemy lines. Or was it coercion? You can feel the chilling weight of power dynamics. A soldier with authority, with a weapon, with the power to make your life, or the lives of your family, incredibly difficult or surprisingly easier. The choices available to women in an occupied territory were often stark and brutal. Survival became the paramount concern, blurring the moral compass. A whispered threat, an unspoken expectation, could be as binding as any chain. You might have watched a woman, her eyes downcast, walk beside a German officer, and you would wonder, was it choice, or was it the crushing weight of necessity? And then, there was the allure of basic needs. During the brutal years of occupation, food was scarce, resources dwindled, and a future seemed a distant, unattainable dream. A German soldier might have access to extra rations, a piece of meat, a loaf of bread, a handful of sugar, precious commodities that could mean the difference between starvation and survival for a family. He might offer protection from the increasingly harsh realities of war, a fleeting sense of security in a world turned upside down. Perhaps he offered the illusion of a future, a fleeting glimpse of normalcy, a promise of escape from the endless gray of occupation. These were powerful incentives, almost irresistible temptations for those teetering on the edge of desperation. You would see some women, perhaps out of defiance or misplaced loyalty, or simply a desperate grasp for identity, even choosing to wear elements of German uniforms in public, a cap, a belt, a specific type of boot. This act, however small, was perceived as an enormous betrayal, a visible symbol of allegiance to the enemy. It wasn't merely a fashion choice, it was a flag, a declaration, and it sparked an immediate, furious outrage among the local population. You can almost hear the sharp intakes of breath, the whispered condemnations, the rapid spread of gossip that would inevitably precede the storm. These women, whether their reasons were love, survival, or simple folly, were already marked, living under a silent, unforgiving judgment that would soon explode into a very public, very painful reckoning. You gaze upon a quiet, almost forgotten, statistic that speaks volumes of hidden lives. Around 200,000 babies, a staggering number, were born in France during the occupation, children of French mothers and German fathers. Imagine a generation, spanning almost 5 years, arriving into a world already fractured. Their very existence a living, breathing testament to the complex and often painful realities of war. These were not just numbers. They were small, fragile human beings, each with a unique face, a unique cry, a unique potential. You see them in your mind's eye, perhaps a baby wrapped in a faded blanket, innocent eyes blinking against the light, utterly unaware of the storm they represent. This wasn't a phenomenon unique to France. You realize that similar patterns, similar heart-wrenching stories, unfolded in other occupied territories, in the rugged, windswept landscapes of Norway, where German forces maintained a strong presence. Thousands of children were also born from these cross-cultural unions. And on the small, isolated Channel Islands, the only British territory occupied by the Nazis, the intimate proximity between occupiers and civilians likewise gave rise to these children of two flags. In each place, the narrative was tragically similar, the innocence of birth overshadowed by the shame of circumstances. For these children, their very existence was seen by their communities as living proof of a profound betrayal. You can feel the chill of that judgment, the heavy weight of it settling upon tiny shoulders. They were branded, often from their first breath, as illegitimate, not just in the legal sense, but in the moral fabric of society. Their eyes, their hair, a subtle curve of their nose, anything that might hint at their paternal lineage, became a cruel marker, a visible tattoo of the enemy within. They were shunned, subjected to ostracism from the very communities into which they were born. You can almost hear the whispered taunts, the doors closing subtly, the playground games that suddenly excluded them. Imagine growing up in the shadow of such a profound stigma. Their lineage was a constant, inescapable reminder of a past that their communities desperately wanted to forget. A painful echo of a time of humiliation and subjugation. These were children born between enemy lines, innocent and undeserving, yet tragically punished for the perceived sins of survival committed by their mothers, their childhoods. Instead of being a time of carefree discovery, were often marred by the unspoken accusations, the cold stares, and the profound sense of being an outsider in their own land. You feel the immense sorrow for this lost generation, caught in a historical trap not of their making, forever carrying the burden of a conflict that defined their beginnings. Their story is a quiet tragedy, a poignant footnote to the grand narratives of war, reminding us that its deepest scars often lie not on the battlefield, but in the most tender, vulnerable corners of human life. You feel a creeping dread, a chill wind blowing not from the distant battlefields, but from the heart of the very communities celebrating liberation. For as the Allied forces swept through, another, far more ancient form of punishment re-emerged from the dark recesses of history: public head-shaving ceremonies. It was a practice not seen widely in Europe for centuries, a chilling echo of medieval degradation, a swift and brutal return to a primal, visceral form of mob justice. You can almost taste the dust of the town square, smell the raw fear mingling with the celebratory wine, as the shouts of freedom begin to twist into something ugly and menacing. You observe the scene with a heavy heart. Women, often bewildered and terrified, are forcibly paraded into the town squares. The very places that moments ago witnessed scenes of tearful embraces and joyous dancing are now transformed into impromptu arenas of public humiliation. The crowds, once cheering liberators, now roar with a different kind of fervor, their faces contorted, shouting insults that cut deeper than any physical blow. The air is thick with a collective, venomous anger, directed not at the retreating enemy, but at their own. You see the shears, cold and glinting, slicing through long, carefully tended hair. Each strand that falls to the ground is not just hair, but a piece of dignity, a fragment of identity, severed and discarded. The act is swift, brutal, and deeply symbolic. A woman's hair, often a symbol of beauty, femininity, and pride, is violently shorn, transforming her in an instant from a respected member of the community into a marked outsider, an object of scorn. The shaved head becomes a stark, visible badge of shame, impossible to hide, a permanent accusation etched onto her very being. Then, you witness further acts of chilling degradation. Some women have swastikas painted directly onto their faces, grotesque symbols of their alleged betrayal. It is applied with crude tools, sometimes with bright red lipstick, a mocking parody of femininity, or more horrifyingly, with thick, black tar, burning and stinging their skin. You can almost feel the rough, unyielding texture, the acrid smell, the slow, agonizing smear of paint across their forehead, their cheeks. It is a defacement, an act designed to strip away every last vestige of self-respect and humanity. The crowd, fueled by a potent mix of resentment, trauma, and a thirst for instant gratification, watches intently, often cheering these vile acts. These public spectacles, brutally efficient in their cruelty, were quickly dubbed the ugly carnivals. You realize, with a profound sense of sadness, that these events were never about justice. There were no trials, no evidence presented, no opportunity for defense. They were a visceral, impulsive expression of collective rage, a public degradation designed to purify the community through ritualized humiliation. The joyous liberation had, in a terrifying blink of an eye, turned into a period of raw, unchecked retribution, leaving a lasting, bitter stain on the fabric of a nation that believed itself to be free. The carnival of cruelty had just begun, a dark counterpoint to the relief that should have defined this moment. You stand, a silent witness, as the so-called ugly carnivals escalate into even more brutal and dehumanizing spectacles. The air, thick with the scent of fear and the raw emotion of the crowd, presses in on you. The sight is difficult to process. Women, their hair already brutally shorn, are now subjected to further, horrifying indignities. You see them stripped, sometimes half naked, their vulnerability exposed to the jeering throngs. It is a calculated act of public shaming, designed to obliterate any last shred of modesty or personal dignity. The chill of the air on their bare skin, the searing heat of shame, must be an unbearable torment. Then comes the tar, thick and black, a sticky, vile substance. You watch, horrified, as it is smeared onto their bodies, their faces, their bare shoulders. You can almost feel the heavy, greasy texture, the acrid, burning sensation on your own skin, the deep, pervasive smell that must cling to them for days, weeks, a constant reminder of their ordeal. This is not just physical discomfort. It is a profound defilement, a visible mark of their deemed impurity. And as if this were not enough, some are brutally beaten, their bodies recoiling from the blows. You hear the sickening thud of fists, the gasps of pain, the muffled cries, all drowned out by the escalating roar of the crowd. The horror intensifies as you see some women collapse, their fragile bodies unable to withstand the relentless assault. Kicked, pushed, and pummeled. A few are rendered unconscious. Their limp forms a grim testament to the mob's unchecked fury. You even hear hushed, horrified whispers of some who did not survive the process, their lives extinguished in a surge of collective rage, with no semblance of law or justice. The casual brutality is sickening, a chilling reminder of how quickly humanity can unravel under the guise of righteous anger. The procession continues, a macabre parade. You see them hoisted onto the backs of trucks, like specimens, like objects to be observed and reviled. As the trucks lumber slowly through the streets, the women are forced to endure an unending gauntlet of public torment. The crowds, emboldened by their numbers and the absence of any true authority, become a tidal wave of hatred. They jeer, their voices harsh and mocking. They spit, their saliva hitting the women's faces, a visceral expression of contempt. They hurl insults, words sharper and more painful than stones, designed to wound the spirit. You can almost hear the biting words, feel the wet impact of spittle, the sting of a thrown pebble. And in the midst of this terrifying maelstrom, you are confronted with a truly heartbreaking realization many, perhaps even most, of those caught in this storm of vengeance had done nothing wrong. Their supposed crime was merely existing in a compromised world, or being the target of a jealous neighbor, a malicious rumor, or a simple case of mistaken identity. The line between true guilt and groundless suspicion had vanished completely, consumed by the collective hysteria of a newly liberated people desperate to exorcise the demons of occupation. And tragically, finding the most vulnerable among themselves to scapegoat. The spectacle of humiliation served as a release, a terrifying performance of purification that left deep, indelible scars on its unwilling participants and on the soul of the community itself. You consider the profound imbalance of this cruel retribution. Where are the German soldiers, the supposed partners in this horizontal collaboration? They are gone. The vast majority have retreated with the remnants of the Wehrmacht, a defeated army making its desperate way back to a collapsing homeland. Many more have perished on the battlefields, their lives ended in the brutal calculus of war. They simply vanished, leaving behind the women and children to face the full, unmitigated force of a community's wrath. You can almost feel the emptiness, the sudden void left by their departure, an absence that offers no explanation, no defense, no shared burden. These women, now standing alone in the unforgiving glare of public scrutiny, had no way to explain themselves, no platform to articulate the complexities of their choices. their circumstances, or their genuine affections? How do you explain love forged in wartime? Desperation born of scarcity, or simple acts of kindness exchanged in a world devoid of compassion? To a mob blinded by rage, their narratives, whatever they may have been, were silenced, unheard, unwanted. Their voices were drowned out by the roar of accusation, their stories deemed irrelevant in the face of perceived betrayal. And then there were the children, these fragile, innocent beings, branded from birth as traitors to a nation they couldn't even comprehend. You imagine their quiet confusion, their unspoken questions as they grew up under the weight of an accusation they could never escape, forever tethered to a paternal figure who was, for them, little more than a ghost, an absent name whispered with contempt. They carried the mark, the stain of their father's nationality, a heavy legacy that alienated them from their own mother's people. A chilling thought surfaces some women, in acts of desperate loyalty or profound despair, even chose to follow their German lovers, attempting to find them in the chaos of retreat, or worse, joining them in the bleak confines of prison camps. Imagine the journey, the hunger, the cold, the ultimate futility of such a pilgrimage. It speaks to a bond, however misguided or tragically formed, that transcended the brutal realities of war and the judgment of their compatriots. Yet, even in this self-imposed exile, there was no shield from blame. Their choice only further solidified their condemnation in the eyes of those they left behind. There was no advocate for these women, no one to stand between them and the crushing weight of public opprobrium. There was no due process, no courtroom where their complex realities could be heard, no compassionate ear to listen to their desperate pleas. There was only silence, the deafening silence of a community that had closed ranks against them, the profound silence of the absent fathers, and the enforced silence of the women themselves, their stories buried under layers of shame and unspoken regret. Their torment was a solo performance, a unilateral punishment, a cruel testament to the uneven scales of wartime justice. You realize, with a chilling clarity, that the accusations levied against these women often bore little to no relation to reality. Many of the victims of these ugly carnivals had never, in truth, engaged in intimate relations with German soldiers. They were, in essence, caught in a swirling vortex of unfounded suspicion, their lives upended by a perverse form of social cleansing. You feel a pang of profound injustice at the thought, the sheer arbitrariness of who was targeted and why. Imagine a quiet widow, living alone, perhaps trying to keep her small farm going, or a diligent teacher, continuing to educate children amidst the turmoil, or a poor woman, struggling daily to feed her family in a time of extreme scarcity. These were often among the most vulnerable, easy targets for the fear and resentment that simmered beneath the surface of the community. A jealous neighbor, harboring a long-standing grudge, might whisper a malicious lie. A business rival might seize the opportunity to discredit a competitor. A simple case of mistaken identity, a fleeting resemblance to someone else, could be enough to seal a woman's fate. You hear the phantom whispers, the sly insinuations, the rapid spread of rumor, each one a nail hammered into an innocent coffin. The very act of living near German soldiers, an unavoidable reality in many occupied towns, was often enough to spark condemnation. Imagine having a German patrol regularly passing your house, or a small garrison quartered just down the street. It would be impossible not to have some form of interaction. however minimal, however unwilling, even worse. If you were forced, under direct order, to house German soldiers in your home, your fate was practically sealed. You had no choice in the matter, no agency. Yet this involuntary cohabitation was instantly twisted into evidence of willing complicity. The simple act of providing a bed or a meal, under duress, became a mark of betrayal. The line between true guilt and mere suspicion vanished with terrifying speed in the collective hysteria of liberation. Rational thought evaporated, replaced by raw emotion and a desperate need to find scapegoats. The years of pent-up frustration, humiliation, and powerlessness at the hands of the German occupiers found an easy, convenient outlet in these women. They became the symbolic repository of all the community's pain and anger, an embodiment of the perceived stain that needed to be cleansed. You witness how easily a mob can be whipped into a frenzy, how quickly individuals can shed their empathy and succumb to a shared, destructive impulse. The injustice is palpable. The lack of due process, the absence of any real investigation, meant that innocence offered no shield. The whispers became shouts. The accusations became facts. And the arbitrary nature of the mob's cruel justice ensured that the truly innocent suffered alongside the genuinely complicit, perhaps even more so. You feel a deep sorrow for these unacknowledged victims, their stories lost in the thunder of popular rage, their lives irrevocably scarred by a storm they did not create and could not escape. You are a horrified spectator as mob justice fully seizes control of the streets. With the collapse of official authority and the chaos of liberation, the traditional pillars of law and order crumble. In their place, the crowd itself becomes both judge and executioner, wielding a brutal, immediate form of retribution. The sheer force of their collective will is terrifying. A monolithic entity driven by years of suppressed anger and humiliation. You feel the tremor of their unified footsteps, the chilling crescendo of their voices, a sound both primal and deeply disturbing. Even the Allied soldiers, men hardened by the brutal realities of combat, by the unspeakable horrors of the battlefield, recoil in disbelief and disgust at what they witness. They have seen death, destruction, and the worst of humanity in uniform. But this public, ritualized degradation of unarmed women by their own countrymen is a new, profoundly shocking form of cruelty. You see the bewildered expressions on their faces, the quiet conversations among them, their shared horror at this unexpected manifestation of human depravity. They came as liberators, expecting joy and gratitude, not this grotesque display of communal violence. They had fought against the Nazis, an external enemy. But here, the vengeance was shockingly, tragically, turned inward against their own people. It's a stark, painful truth. The immediate, visceral vengeance was not directed at the Nazis, who had largely disappeared, nor at the top-tier collaborators who had truly betrayed the nation. No, the easiest targets, the most visible and vulnerable, were these women. They became the proxy, the symbolic sacrifice for a nation's festering wounds. Their public shaming served as a catharsis, a twisted act of purification for a traumatized populace. You feel the weight of this collective betrayal, the profound irony that those who had just been freed would now inflict such profound wounds on their own. The cameras of the war correspondents, ever present to document the historic moments of liberation, also captured these horrifying scenes. You imagine the click of the shutter, freezing a woman's terrified face, her newly shaved head stark against the background of a cheering mob. You see the crude swastikas, painted in tar or lipstick, starkly visible on their foreheads, a permanent mark of disgrace. These photographs, taken in the heat of the moment, became haunting relics of public cruelty, ghosts of a past that many would rather forget. They are silent screams preserved on paper, stark reminders that cruelty does not always wear a uniform, and that the lines between justice and vengeance are often blurred beyond recognition in the aftermath of conflict. The faces in those photographs, stripped bare of dignity, forever bear witness to a moment when a nation, in its desperate struggle for rebirth, turned its deepest pain into a weapon against its own. You sense the profound, lasting quiet that falls after the storm of the ugly carnivals, a silence far heavier than the preceding chaos. For many of the women subjected to these public humiliations, the shame was a burden they carried for the rest of their lives. It wasn't a temporary disgrace. It was an indelible mark, a stigma that followed them like a shadow wherever they went. You imagine them trying to rebuild their lives, to disappear, to find a place where the whispers didn't follow, where the memory of that day wasn't etched into every face they met. But for most, it was an impossible task. They were often exiled, if not physically, then socially, from their own communities, forced to live on the margins, forever outsiders in their own homes. The profound injustice of their fate is made even more poignant by the fact that most of these women never received any form of apology. There were no official statements of regret, no public acknowledgments of the wrongs committed against them. You feel the deep hollowness of that absence, the lack of any official closure or validation for their suffering. Their cries for justice went unheard, their innocence unproven in any formal setting. There was no opportunity for legal defense, no courtroom where their complex stories could be presented, no chance to explain the coercion, the desperation, or even the genuine human connection that might have existed. They were condemned by popular sentiment, and popular sentiment rarely apologizes. Instead, their pleas met with silence, a heavy, pervasive silence from the authorities who turned a blind eye to the mob's actions, and a chilling silence from the very neighbors and friends who had participated in, or stood by during, their humiliation. This lack of rehabilitation, this absence of any effort to reintegrate them into society, meant that their wounds festered, unhealed, for decades. You feel the quiet despair of such a fate, the loneliness of living with an unacknowledged pain. And tragically, for some, the punishment was even more severe. A few women, accused of these perceived betrayals, were executed outright, with no time for explanation, no chance to utter a last word of defense. Imagine the swift, brutal finality of such an end. Their lives extinguished not by enemy fire, but by the cold, unyielding hand of their own countrymen. You feel the profound shock of this ultimate betrayal. A life cut short not by the grand, tragic machinery of war, but by the raw, vengeful impulses of their own people. Their deepest wounds, you realize, came not from the war itself, not from the German occupation, but from the very people they thought they were being freed to rejoin. The liberation, meant to bring peace and unity, instead brought a new form of violence, a fracture within the very heart of the nation. It is a chilling reminder that freedom, without empathy and justice, can be as cruel as any tyranny, leaving scars that run deeper than any physical wound. echoing through generations in the quiet shame and unspoken sorrow. You are left with a haunting image, one that has lingered in the annals of history. Quiet yet persistent, the image of a bald woman, her face marked with a swastika, her eyes reflecting a profound, unspeakable pain. It is a stark symbol, a silent question mark etched into the collective memory of a nation. This image, a relic from a time of intense turmoil and raw emotion, serves as a powerful, uncomfortable reminder of the profound consequences when human societies succumb to a thirst for immediate retribution. As you reflect on this journey, a crucial, chilling truth begins to emerge. The line between justice and vengeance is far thinner, far more permeable than we often like to believe. In times of profound societal upheaval, when emotions run high and the collective trauma of war is still raw, that delicate boundary can dissolve entirely. Justice, which should be tempered by law and due process, can easily morph into a primal, unthinking hunger for retribution, indistinguishable from pure, unadulterated vengeance. You see how quickly the cries for fairness can become a clamor for cruelty, how easily the desire for accountability can turn into a thirst for blood. The narrative of these women teaches us another difficult lesson in the aftermath of war. Cruelty doesn't always wear a uniform. It doesn't always come from the obvious enemy, marching in lockstep. Sometimes, it emerges from within, from the very fabric of the communities that have suffered, a dark byproduct of trauma and unaddressed grievances. It manifests in the actions of neighbors, of friends, of those who shared the same streets and bore the same burdens. You feel the quiet terror of this realization, the unsettling thought that the greatest threat can sometimes come from those you call your own. And perhaps the most poignant, most bitter lesson of all is this: sometimes the harshest punishment, the most enduring pain, comes not from the enemy, but from your neighbors, from those whose trust you believed you had, whose support you expected, whose understanding you might have hoped for. The betrayal from within, the judgment from one's own people, can cut deeper than any wound inflicted by a foreign hand. It leaves not just physical scars, but wounds of the spirit, wounds of the soul that never truly heal. As we gently close this chapter of history, the haunting image of those hairless ghosts remains, not as an accusation, but as a quiet, powerful reminder. They whisper to us across the decades, urging us to remember the fragile nature of justice, the potent danger of unchecked emotion, and the enduring human capacity for both immense cruelty and profound resilience. Their stories, once silenced, now float on the gentle currents of memory, a quiet warning for all times. And perhaps, as you drift off to slumber, you might carry this quiet reflection with you, a deeper understanding of the complex, often contradictory, tapestry of human experience.